"You don't even belong here." A voice snapped across the store, sharp and cold like a gust of winter wind through a cracked window. Malik Jefferson paused just inside the doorway, his hand lightly resting on the frame, taking in the scene with quiet precision. The small retail space smelled faintly of polish and old paper, fluorescent lights buzzing softly above. He wore a simple gray hoodie and faded jeans, sneakers scuffing lightly against the worn tile floor, blending seamlessly into the everyday bustle. Yet every eye in the room felt the subtle gravity he carried. In the far corner, a janitor crouched low, mop handle trembling in his grip, shoulders shaking as he silently fought back tears, a moment so fragile it drew in the room's attention without a sound. Malik's gaze swept across the store. There were a handful of staff standing near the register, their expressions caught between irritation and self-righteousness, unaware that the person they were scrutinizing was the very man behind the brand. The air felt dense, charged with the tension of unspoken judgments and assumptions, a silent commentary on appearance and perceived status. Malik moved deliberately forward, the faint tap of his sneakers on tile echoing slightly in the hush, noting the subtle interactions, the way one clerk whispered to another about the janitor's failure to keep up, the quiet eye rolls when a customer approached asking for assistance. Everything was ordinary. Yet Malik saw the extraordinary undercurrents of bias threading through each glance and muttered word. He stopped a few feet away from the janitor, crouched slightly, allowing a gentle aura of calm to envelop the space, letting the young man know he was witnessed without yet revealing himself. The janitor's eyes flickered toward him, confusion mingling with exhaustion, but Malik didn't speak. He simply nodded once, the slightest acknowledgment of recognition and solidarity. Around them, the staff moved as if in a careful choreography, unaware that every movement, every small judgment, was silently catalogued by Malik's mind. The fluorescent light reflected off the polished counters, glinting off the simple metal nameplates, yet it couldn't mask the tension thick in the air, the unspoken weight of inequity and silent suffering. Malik's presence was both subtle and formidable, a study in contrasts. Unseen yet deeply affecting, ordinary yet commanding. Each step he took toward the center of the store was measured, deliberate, almost cinematic, a rhythm that drew the room into a slow-motion awareness of itself. And all the while, the janitor's quiet sobs punctuated the stillness, a raw counterpoint to the hidden power that Malik held in reserve, waiting for the precise moment to shift the balance of authority and recognition. Malik Jefferson stepped deeper into the store, his eyes scanning the shelves and counters with the precision of someone who had built the business from the ground up, though today he wore no badge, no title, only a quiet confidence that moved through him like a current. The fluorescent lights above cast a consistent glow, highlighting the dust motes drifting lazily in the air, the faint scent of coffee and store polish mingling to form the familiar atmosphere he knew so well. He walked past racks of merchandise, noticing small details, the slightly crooked price tags, the faint fingerprints on the glass display, the worn edges of the flooring near the busiest aisles. Malik's gaze returned repeatedly to the janitor, still crouched, mop leaning against his shoulder, shoulders trembling with the weight of exhaustion and frustration. The staff at the register, a trio of young employees with crisp uniforms and name tags, whispered among themselves, glances darting nervously toward the janitor, then back toward Malik as if they sensed a presence beyond his simple attire. Each step Malik took was deliberate, measured, his sneakers making a soft rhythm on the tile that seemed to command attention without a word. He paused by the front counter, leaning lightly against the edge, letting the silence stretch between him and the employees, the unspoken power in his posture filling the space. He noticed subtle microexpressions, tightened jaws, brief furrowing of brows, the quick glance down at registers and scanners, all indicating that the staff believed they understood the hierarchy of the store, unaware that the very structure they relied on was in Malik's hands. Malik took a slow, deliberate breath, allowing the tension to build just enough for clarity, for observation. He moved closer to the janitor, lowering himself slightly so that his presence was gentle but undeniable. The janitor's eyes flickered up, hesitation and relief mingling, and Malik offered a small, acknowledging nod, a silent signal that he was seen, that his attention was focused on the quiet suffering that often went unnoticed in the daily operations of the store. Around them, customers moved through the aisles, unaware of the undercurrents. Swirling in the small space, yet the charged atmosphere seemed to ripple outward, touching even the most distracted shoppers. Malik's mind cataloged every interaction, every whispered comment, every subtle gesture of condescension or impatience that had gone unnoticed, storing them for the precise moment when the full truth would be revealed. He allowed a few moments to pass, his presence steady and unassuming, as though the ordinary rhythm of the store continued while he observed the extraordinary inequities that had quietly taken root. The fluorescent hum above was almost comforting, a metronome for the quiet drama unfolding, punctuated only by the soft shuffle of shoes, the faint clink of merchandise being handled, and the janitor's quiet breaths. Malik's eyes never left the staff, noting the small ways they tried to assert authority or display control, unaware that their actions were under the careful scrutiny of the founder himself. He moved slowly toward the center of the store, adjusting his posture, letting his calm command the space without a single word, letting the staff feel the unspoken weight of observation, of accountability. Each glance he received, each whisper he overheard, added a layer to the understanding of the store's internal dynamics, the subtle hierarchies and biases that had gone unchecked. The janitor straightened slightly, mop still in hand, feeling a quiet reassurance from Malik's measured presence, a sense that the injustice they faced was now being witnessed by someone with the power to effect change. Malik allowed his gaze to linger on the staff, noting every flicker of surprise, every subtle moment of uncertainty that passed across their faces as they processed his calm authority. The store itself seemed to pause, the ordinary sounds of commerce dimming under the tension, the charged atmosphere pulling attention toward the interactions in the center. Malik's quiet observation created a space for reflection, a slow-motion awareness for everyone present, drawing the room into a heightened state where small actions and words carried weight far beyond their immediate context. And through it all, Malik's presence remained understated yet potent, a reminder that authority and respect did not need to be announced, only recognized through measured action and unwavering attention. The atmosphere in the store thickened as Malik Jefferson continued his quiet observation, noting the subtle ways the staff interacted with each other and with the customers around them. The young clerk at the register tapped impatiently on the keyboard, glancing over at the janitor with a mixture of disdain and barely contained frustration, while Malik's presence seemed to draw the room into a heightened state of awareness, as though the ordinary rhythm of daily business had been disrupted by an invisible but undeniable current. Malik's eyes swept over the inventory shelves, noticing the small imperfections that had gone unnoticed for weeks, the slightly misaligned tags, the dust along the edges of the display cases, the faint smudges on the glass doors, and he cataloged them not for criticism, but for understanding, piecing together the small details that revealed the broader patterns of negligence and bias that had quietly shaped the store's environment. The janitor straightened slightly, his hands still trembling, and Malik offered a small, composed nod, signaling acknowledgment without drawing attention to himself, a silent promise that the struggle he had endured was now being seen. A customer approached the counter, asking for assistance with a product, and Malik noted the clerk's subtle hesitations, the microexpressions that betrayed a judgment formed without understanding, a bias that seemed to ripple through every interaction. Malik moved slowly through the store, his steps deliberate, almost rhythmic, creating a quiet cadence that contrasted with the subtle tension in the room, each footfall reinforcing the presence of someone who observed not with anger, but with focused attention. He paused near the janitor again, crouching slightly to meet the young man's eyes, and in that brief contact, Malik conveyed reassurance, an unspoken acknowledgment that the unfairness and condescension that had accumulated over time were now recognized and would not go unaddressed. Across the store, the staff whispered amongst themselves, their voices low, uncertain, carrying the undertones of the assumptions they had made, unaware that the balance of power was shifting subtly, invisibly, with every measured glance and silent assessment Malik offered. He allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to make the unspoken clear, that observation alone was a form of authority, that the judgments cast lightly and without reflection were being noted and cataloged with precision. The janitor, feeling the weight of Malik's steady presence, drew a slow, steadying breath, the initial tremor in his hands subsiding as he realized that his quiet distress had been seen by someone who held the ultimate authority over the environment in which he worked. Malik's gaze shifted briefly to the customers moving through the aisles, noticing the subtle shifts in attention, the way they paused momentarily as the charged atmosphere seemed to ripple outward, drawing their awareness to the interactions in the center of the store. Every movement, every gesture of impatience or derision by the staff became a data point, a marker of the internal culture that had allowed inequity to persist, all silently recorded in Malik's mind as he prepared for the moment when observation would give way to intervention. The fluorescent lights above hummed consistently, a soft, continuous sound that underscored the stillness, the measured quiet in the center of the store that contrasted sharply with the undercurrent of anxiety and whispered judgments. Malik allowed the tension to build slowly, observing the interactions with both care and patience, understanding that the small actions of each staff member carried weight and meaning, that the way they treated the janitor, the way they positioned themselves in relation to each other and to the customers, revealed the unspoken hierarchies that governed their behavior. He moved toward the center again, standing upright, allowing the full measure of his quiet authority to fill the space, the subtle shift in posture, the calm assurance in his expression, making it clear without words that the balance had changed, that the ordinary assumptions and judgments would no longer hold unchecked. The janitor's shoulders relaxed slightly, the softest of exhalations signaling the release of tension, the first moment in hours, perhaps days, that he felt a sense of acknowledgment and safety in the midst of the busy store. Malik's gaze remained steady, moving from the janitor to the staff, noting every flicker of discomfort, every hesitation, every microexpression that betrayed awareness of the subtle shift occurring around them. Customers moving through the aisles seemed to sense the energy as well, the quiet change in tone and awareness that accompanied Malik's presence, their glances flicking toward the center, drawn into the unfolding dynamic. Malik allowed himself a brief pause, absorbing the scene, cataloging the dynamics, understanding the flow of the room, and waiting for the precise moment when the measured observation would transition into deliberate action, when the silent authority he projected would be recognized by all present, setting the stage for the revelations to come. As Malik Jefferson continued to observe, a quiet shift began to ripple through the store, subtle but undeniable, like the first hints of wind stirring leaves on a still afternoon. A young customer near the display shelves hesitated, glancing toward the center of the room where Malik and the janitor shared a moment of silent acknowledgment, sensing that something larger than the day-to-day operations was unfolding. Malik's eyes moved deliberately across the staff, cataloging their microexpressions, the fleeting moments of doubt, the barely perceptible adjustments in posture, each revealing an awareness that the balance of authority was quietly tilting. He noticed the way one clerk's fingers lingered on the register buttons, hesitation mixing with the instinctive need to maintain control, while another bit the inside of her lip, catching a flicker of understanding in her peripheral vision. The janitor stood slowly, mop still in hand, shoulders straightening under the invisible weight of Malik's presence, feeling a sense of recognition that had eluded him for hours, perhaps days, as though someone finally saw the quiet perseverance that had gone unnoticed for so long. Malik moved closer, each step deliberate, measured, allowing the space between him and the staff to stretch just enough to create tension without confrontation, a slow-building anticipation that held the room's attention in a taut, cinematic pause. The fluorescent lights above seemed to hum with the rhythm of the moment, casting consistent illumination across counters and shelves, highlighting the small details, the tiny scuff on the floor near the janitor's station, the slightly askew merchandise tags, the fingerprints that remained on the glass despite recent cleaning. Malik's gaze lingered briefly on each detail, not to criticize, but to understand, to fully perceive the environment and the patterns of behavior that had persisted unnoticed and unchallenged. The staff exchanged furtive glances, whispers almost imperceptible, yet Malik noticed each one, the subtle ways in which they assessed each other, their assumptions about who held authority and who did not, and the invisible hierarchies that had shaped their interactions. Malik crouched slightly near the janitor once more, allowing his presence to convey support, a silent assurance that the efforts and struggles of the day had not gone unseen. The janitor's eyes met Malik's for a fraction of a second, a spark of relief and cautious hope reflected there, and Malik gave a barely perceptible nod, the kind of acknowledgment that resonated more powerfully than words. Around them, the store's usual rhythm continued, the soft murmur of customers browsing, the quiet beeps of scanners, the gentle shuffle of shoes on tile, but beneath it, a charged awareness began to thread through the space, connecting staff, customers, and the janitor into a shared recognition of something larger unfolding. Malik's attention shifted again, noting the way employees adjusted their movements subtly, how their expressions flickered with uncertainty, how micro-gestures betrayed an internal reckoning with the quiet authority present. The store, familiar and ordinary in appearance, had become a stage for observation and subtle influence, a space where quiet presence and measured attention were already beginning to alter the dynamics without a single spoken word. Malik allowed the silence to extend, letting it breathe, letting the unspoken truths of hierarchy and bias become tangible to those around him, preparing the room for the moment when observation would transform into deliberate action. Customers in the aisles paused momentarily, sensing the shift, their attention drawn to the interactions in the center of the store, their awareness subtly aligned with the change Malik had quietly initiated. The fluorescent hum above provided a constant backdrop, a metronome marking the slow, deliberate tempo of the unfolding scene, a rhythm that underscored the weight of observation, the gravity of presence, and the anticipation of the revelation that was to come. Malik's gaze remained steady, scanning each person in the room, the employees, the janitor, the customers, noting the flickers of comprehension, the quiet acknowledgments, the imperceptible tensions building as the room became conscious of the underlying truth and the unspoken authority that had arrived among them. And in this quiet, charged pause, Malik Jefferson held the space, an unseen but palpable force, preparing the room and its occupants for the moment when silence would give way to clarity, when hidden truths would surface, and the balance of power would finally be recognized and understood by all present. The janitor's quiet sobs echoed softly through the store, a rhythm of exhaustion and silent pleading that seemed to fill every corner of the space. Yet Malik Jefferson remained calm, his presence like an anchor amid the undercurrent of tension. He stepped closer, each motion deliberate, measured, ensuring that the janitor knew he was seen and understood without speaking a word. Malik's mind wandered briefly, memories of his own early days surfacing. First steps into a small office where he had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, times when his own contributions had been ignored, when assumptions about his abilities had been made solely based on appearances and background. The flashbacks were vivid. A younger Malik in a modest suit, greeted with skepticism, questioned about credentials he had earned through years of relentless effort, and yet always maintaining composure, always cataloging every slight, every word, storing them not for bitterness, but for understanding and for the precise moment when his authority would be unassailable. The janitor, still holding the mop, glanced at Malik with a mixture of confusion and tentative hope, sensing that someone recognized the depth of the struggle and the endurance required to persist in the face of consistent oversight and underestimation. Malik allowed a soft exhale to pass, the sound almost imperceptible, yet it carried reassurance, a signal that patience and observation were forms of power, that the acknowledgement of injustice could be a precursor to correction. Across the store, the staff continued their subtle movements, whispering to each other, their expressions flickering between irritation and uncertainty, the first signs that the energy in the room had begun to shift. Malik's eyes tracked each interaction, noting the slight hesitation when a customer approached, the micro-gestures of discomfort, the half-formed words that betrayed the unconscious awareness that their assessments were being observed and that the hierarchy they assumed was not as fixed as they believed. The air felt charged, a quiet electricity flowing between shelves and counters, through the aisles, connecting customers, staff, and the janitor in an almost imperceptible web of awareness, a shared recognition that something unseen had entered their midst and altered the space. Malik crouched slightly to meet the janitor's gaze directly, a small, intentional gesture that communicated acknowledgment, solidarity, and calm without drawing attention, a silent message that the unfairness and lack of recognition would not go unrecorded or unchallenged. The janitor's trembling eased incrementally, shoulders rising from a hunch, hands gripping the mop with a steadier grip, the first faint indication of relief that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the quiet recognition of presence and validation. Malik rose slowly, maintaining a steady, composed posture, and let the staff feel the weight of his observation, a calm but undeniable authority that did not require spoken assertion. Customers continued to browse, their attention subtly pulled toward the unfolding dynamic, some pausing briefly, sensing the tension, aware that the ordinary cadence of the store had shifted, that observation itself was now an act of accountability. Malik's gaze swept the room, noting each microexpression, each moment of hesitation, each flicker of realization, cataloging them with deliberate precision, preparing for the moment when the quiet would transform into deliberate, organized response. The fluorescent lights above continued to hum steadily, a constant backdrop to the charged stillness, their illumination revealing every small detail in the store while casting the scene in a neutral, almost documentary light. Malik allowed the pause to extend, a slow, deliberate stretch of attention, letting the staff feel the undercurrent of authority, letting the room absorb the subtle but growing awareness that the environment and its patterns of interaction were now fully observed. The janitor's breathing became steadier, his posture more upright, and in that simple shift, Malik recognized the first signs of resilience returning, a quiet empowerment sparked by the acknowledgment of struggle. Malik's presence filled the room without a word, a deliberate, controlled power that communicated observation, awareness, and the inevitability of recognition. The store, familiar in layout but now charged with silent anticipation, seemed to wait with him, every aisle, every counter, every customer caught in the subtle gravity of what was about to unfold. Malik's eyes remained steady, tracking every subtle motion, every whispered exchange, ensuring that when the time came, the revelation, the reckoning, and the corrective clarity would occur with precision and undeniable authority, a moment where the quiet endurance of the janitor and the observation of injustice would converge into a truth that could no longer be ignored. Malik Jefferson took a measured step back, straightening his posture and allowing the subtle shift in the room to settle like a quiet tide, knowing that the moment for action was approaching but not yet to be rushed. He reached for his phone, sliding it from the pocket of his hoodie with deliberate calm, and tapped a few commands that sent notifications quietly across the corporate system, initiating the first stage of what he internally called Protocol Alpha, a sequence designed to confirm facts, summon support, and prepare the revelation that would soon demand attention. The staff at the register continued their low murmurs, glances flicking toward the janitor and then back toward Malik, the uncertainty in their eyes growing as they began to sense that something was changing in the hierarchy they had assumed was fixed, that the quiet figure observing them was far from ordinary. Malik allowed a brief pause, his gaze resting on the janitor for a heartbeat, acknowledging the strain and the resilience, silently promising that the acknowledgment would be followed by action, that the quiet endurance would no longer be invisible. From his phone, a subtle vibration indicated confirmation. Internal records had been pulled, employee histories and previous complaints cross-referenced, and every instance of neglect or condescension cataloged in a secure and tamper-proof log. Malik's calm attention remained fixed on the employees, noting the microexpressions that betrayed their awareness of the invisible but growing accountability surrounding them, the slight hesitation in gestures, the almost imperceptible pause in conversation. He moved slowly through the store, the soft scuff of his sneakers against the tile punctuating the stillness, reinforcing the presence of a person whose authority was both quiet and undeniable, whose observation alone was beginning to alter behavior without a word. The janitor straightened fully now, mop still in hand, the trembling of moments before replaced by a steadying awareness, a small but significant shift in posture that signaled both relief and the first understanding of the change that Malik was preparing to make manifest. Malik's gaze traveled from the janitor to the staff, noting how each subtle gesture, each expression of uncertainty, was now feeding into the larger awareness that their behavior was being closely monitored and assessed. The fluorescent lights hummed steadily above, highlighting every detail in the store, every small act of hesitation, every flicker of recognition, casting the ordinary environment in the charged glow of impending revelation. Malik allowed the moment to linger, stretching the silence just long enough for the room to sense the weight of observation and the invisible preparation that had begun. Customers moving through the aisles sensed the quiet tension, pausing slightly, their attention drawn involuntarily to the interactions at the center, feeling the shift in energy even if they could not articulate it. Malik crouched slightly again near the janitor, offering a subtle nod that conveyed reassurance, patience, and recognition. And in that small gesture, the janitor drew a slow, deliberate breath, the first of many that indicated a quiet relief and acknowledgment of being seen. Malik's presence filled the room with a calm, deliberate authority that required no announcement, no raised voice, simply the weight of attention, the assurance of competence, and the deliberate orchestration of the next steps to bring clarity and justice. The staff exchanged uncertain glances, whispers almost inaudible but full of tension, and Malik observed them all, every detail catalogued, every gesture noted, each moment contributing to the unfolding narrative that would soon transform observation into action. Across the store, the charged atmosphere drew in every participant, customers and employees alike, as Malik prepared to transition from quiet observation to deliberate orchestration, initiating the carefully timed steps of Protocol Alpha that would set the stage for the revelation of truth and the demonstration of authority, ensuring that the patterns of neglect and misjudgment would be met with clear and undeniable acknowledgment and correction. Malik stood tall now, his eyes scanning the room with measured precision, the charged stillness of the space highlighting the anticipation, the unspoken expectation, and the imminent arrival of recognition and accountability that would ripple through every corner of the store and every observer present. Malik Jefferson took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the quiet tension in the store stretch just long enough for every eye to turn subtly toward him. And then, without raising his voice, he spoke, his words calm but carrying an unshakable authority. "You have all been treating someone with less respect than they deserve, and for that, you need to understand who I am." A soft ripple ran through the employees, whispers halting, glances exchanged, a flicker of confusion and disbelief crossing their faces as Malik continued. "I am Malik Jefferson, the owner of this store, the person responsible for everything you see and everything you think you control." The words landed with a weight that seemed to slow time, the fluorescent lights above casting a steady glow across his composed face, highlighting the subtle but undeniable power in his presence. The janitor froze mid-step, mop still in hand, eyes wide, a mixture of shock and tentative relief spreading across his features as he realized that the quiet figure who had silently observed, who had offered nothing but acknowledgment and presence, was the very person whose authority and decisions had shaped the store he had worked in for months. Malik allowed a beat of silence, letting the revelation sink in, letting the gravity of the moment permeate the space. As the employees processed the truth, the individual they had assumed to be just another customer or an ordinary bystander was, in fact, the person with ultimate responsibility and authority over their actions. Slowly, recognition and subtle apprehension appeared in their eyes, microexpressions betraying an understanding that their behavior, their whispered judgments, their assumptions, had all been under the careful observation of someone who could act decisively. Malik moved one step closer, calm and measured, maintaining the aura of authority without aggression, and he gestured slightly toward the janitor with the softest nod, acknowledging both his presence and the endurance he had shown in facing subtle injustices. The staff shifted uneasily, the weight of realization pressing down, and Malik spoke again. "Every action, every word you have spoken, every judgment you have made has been recorded and reviewed. This is not about punishment alone. It is about understanding and accountability. You have underestimated, overlooked, and misjudged, and now the truth has been revealed. The air seemed to vibrate with quiet tension, the fluorescent hum above underscoring the stillness as the store became a stage for recognition, responsibility, and the reassertion of order based on fairness and respect rather than assumption and bias. Malik's gaze swept across the room, noting the subtle gestures, the hesitation in movements, the flickers of awareness, and he allowed the silence to extend just long enough for each person to internalize the realization that the ordinary hierarchies they had relied upon were neither fixed nor unquestioned, that authority did not lie in assumption but in truth and presence. Customers paused in the aisles, drawn subtly into the charged atmosphere, sensing a shift, a recalibration of power and acknowledgment that transcended ordinary observation. Malik's voice remained steady, measured, and he concluded, "Respect and dignity are not granted because someone is visible or loud. They are earned through truth, awareness, and acknowledgement." You are seeing that now. The janitor exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing, mop still in hand, absorbing the reassurance and recognition that had been quietly offered over the past minutes, and the staff, still adjusting to the revelation, began to understand the full weight of their assumptions and misjudgments. Malik Jefferson stood in the center of the store, calm, composed, a quiet force whose revelation had shifted the balance, altering the perception and awareness of everyone present. And in that measured, cinematic moment, the room seemed to pause, charged with acknowledgement, accountability, and the undeniable assertion of authority that had been long observed but only now revealed. The store fell into a charged, almost reverent silence as Malik Jefferson's revelation hung in the air, every person present absorbing the truth that had been quietly building for minutes. The employees, once confident in their micro-hierarchies and assumptions, now shifted uneasily, subtle gestures betraying uncertainty as they realized that their every interaction, every whispered judgment, and every small dismissal had been observed and recorded. The janitor, still holding his mop, allowed himself a slow exhale, shoulders lowering slightly as a sense of validation washed over him, the quiet acknowledgement from Malik offering more reassurance than words could provide. Malik moved deliberately to the center of the store, his presence calm, yet commanding, and with a few taps on his phone, the internal system began to respond. Employee records, prior complaints, and customer feedback were pulled into a clear, organized display of accountability that confirmed the patterns Malik had silently cataloged over time. The staff's murmurs grew quieter, glances flicking nervously among themselves as they began to understand the implications, the subtle shift from observation to deliberate correction that was now underway. Malik's voice, steady and composed, filled the space without raising volume. Every action, every comment, every assumption has consequences. The patterns of neglect, oversight, and disrespect that have persisted here will now be addressed with fairness and clarity. The words reverberated through the store, not as a threat, but as a clear articulation of authority, a statement that the balance of power had shifted and that the ordinary assumptions of hierarchy were no longer sufficient. Malik's gaze swept across the room, taking in the subtle reactions, the quickening of breath, the tightened grips on registers, the brief hesitation before gestures, each small signal a testament to the realization that the ordinary daily rhythms had been upended by awareness, and that the previously unchallenged microaggressions had been cataloged with precision. Customers browsing the aisles sensed the subtle energy, their movements pausing as they became quietly aware of the tension and the shift, drawn into the unfolding scene by an invisible gravity that radiated from Malik's composed authority. The fluorescent lights above provided a constant, neutral glow, illuminating every interaction, every expression, every detail of the store, while the system quietly confirmed facts, generated reports, and initiated corrective measures that would soon be visible to all. Malik allowed a measured pause, giving the employees space to absorb, to reflect, and to recognize the consequences of their actions, while the janitor, standing a step straighter, mop in hand, drew a steadying breath that marked the first real moment of relief since the day had begun. Slowly, Malik gestured toward the system, signaling the employees to acknowledge the records and the evidence being presented, a silent but unmistakable direction that change was imminent. The room seemed to stretch in anticipation, every sound. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the subtle shuffle of shoes, the faint tapping of the keyboard, amplified by the charged atmosphere, emphasizing the gravity of the moment. Malik's eyes moved deliberately from one staff member to another, noting the fleeting microexpressions of comprehension, the dawning recognition that their behavior was being addressed, and that the system would now align with fairness, accountability, and truth. Customers continued to pause, watching quietly, some exchanging subtle nods, sensing the demonstration of authority and the restoration of balance without the need for confrontation or raised voices. Malik's presence, calm yet formidable, filled the room, creating a space in which accountability and acknowledgment converged. And as the system completed its initial phase of corrective measures, the employees began to understand that their actions had consequences that would be both immediate and undeniable. The janitor, finally able to release a small, controlled sigh, allowed himself the recognition of endurance and validation, while the staff, standing amidst the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, realized that the ordinary dynamics had been irreversibly altered. Malik Jefferson, composed and unwavering, allowed the moment to linger just long enough to ensure that everyone understood the full scope of the shift, the subtle yet absolute assertion of authority, and the quiet but powerful restoration of balance that had been meticulously orchestrated over the past minutes. The store itself now resonating with the undeniable clarity of observation, truth, and accountability. Malik Jefferson stood in the center of the store, calm and unwavering. As the full weight of his presence settled into the room, the fluorescent lights above casting a steady, neutral glow across counters, shelves, and the subtle expressions of every person present. The employees, once confident in their small hierarchies and unchallenged assumptions, now stood with a quiet awareness, their gestures slowed, eyes flickering with comprehension, as they recognized that the ordinary dynamics they had relied upon were no longer valid in the presence of truth and authority. Malik's gaze shifted toward the janitor, who now stood straighter, mop in hand, shoulders squared as though a weight had been lifted from him, and in that brief glance, Malik conveyed acknowledgment, solidarity, and respect without uttering another word, letting the quiet power of presence speak louder than any raised voice could. The customers moving through the aisles sensed the change, their attention drawn subtly to the interactions at the center, as though the room itself had shifted into a new awareness, a heightened understanding of respect, dignity, and the consequence of assumptions. Malik's phone vibrated lightly in his hand, confirming the completion of the internal protocols he had quietly activated, the system verifying employee records, prior complaints, and behavioral patterns, presenting a clear, undeniable view of accountability, all executed with precision and care. He allowed a measured pause, letting the room absorb the shift, the quiet assertion of authority, and the affirmation that the observations made in silence were now being recognized and acted upon. Employees began to adjust in real time, subtle acknowledgments in their expressions, small gestures of recognition, the first signs of understanding that their behavior had been seen, evaluated, and corrected without drama or spectacle, simply through the deliberate orchestration of truth and authority. Malik's presence radiated a calm decisiveness, each movement considered, each gaze deliberate, as he allowed the subtle but undeniable impact of accountability to permeate the room, teaching through action rather than admonition. The janitor, finally able to release a small, controlled exhale, felt a sense of recognition and empowerment, the acknowledgement of endurance and resilience that had gone unnoticed now validated and supported. Malik turned his attention fully to the staff, noting microexpressions of comprehension, flickers of regret, and subtle shifts in posture, each a silent acknowledgement of their misjudgments and the correction that was now quietly but firmly in place. Customers paused, their eyes quietly following Malik, sensing the authority and fairness now established, understanding without words that the environment had been corrected, that oversight and assumptions would no longer hold sway in the space they inhabited. Malik allowed a few moments to stretch, letting the charged silence solidify, embedding a deep sense of accountability, fairness, and recognition into the atmosphere, the ordinary rhythm of the store now transformed by measured observation, deliberate action, and the restoration of dignity. He moved slowly, purposefully, a single step across the polished tile, ensuring that every presence in the room understood the subtle but absolute assertion of authority that the balance had shifted, and that the patterns of behavior previously tolerated would now align with respect, fairness, and acknowledgment of effort and value. The store felt different, lighter yet more charged. Each corner, each shelf, each expression now illuminated with clarity, the quiet power of presence and deliberate action resonating throughout the space. Malik finally allowed himself a slow, controlled exhale, shoulders steady, eyes scanning the room with calm assurance. Knowing that the transformation was complete, the recognition of endurance and respect established, and that every individual present now carried the understanding that authority, respect, and dignity were not assumed. They were observed, acknowledged, and reinforced, and in that quiet, potent moment, the store itself seemed to breathe, a space transformed by truth, presence, and the deliberate orchestration of justice.